Hello and welcome back to my channel. Your girl is back with yet another educative video. Now this is a video about an Iranian man who says in his video that Asian Middle Eastern people and Jews were black people. Now he goes on to state the reason why he says so. Well, he tells us that the reason is because the temperature there goes up to 50 degrees Celsius in summer, and goes on to say that palm color people cannot endure this heat, therefore cannot be indigenous people to this region. Let's have a look at his video.
I've seen when black people claim that the ancient Hebrews and Jews were black people and Jesus was not a white man. Many white people come across and say, okay, Jesus was not a white man, but he wasn't a black person either, because he was from the Middle East, and therefore, according to them, he must have looked like Arabs. But this is a fallacy. Just because the modern population of a region looks like X doesn't mean that the ancient inhabitants of that region looked also like X. For example, look at Australia. Are white Australians descended from the ancient Aborigines? Or are white Mexicans descended from the ancient Mayans? Of course not. The Middle East is the most melting pot region of the world. There are black, white, brown, Indian looking and Mongoloid looking people in this region, all of whom claim to be native and indigenous to this region. And for example, in Arabs, there are black, white, and mixed, the so-called brown Arabs, all of whom claim to be the real Arabs. But which of them is the real Arab? The black one, the white one, or the brown one? The same goes for Iran. There are many different ethnic groups in Iran. There are Mongoloid-looking Turkmens, there are Indian-looking Baluch, there are native blacks, there are white-looking Turks, there are mixed-looking Kurds and Lurs. Which of them is the true Iranian? And unlike what the believers of the Indo-European hoax claim, the white-looking people in this region are not descended from the ancient mythical Indo-Europeans. These people are mostly Turks or descended from Turks. For example, here in Iran, up to 40% of people are Turks, and I don't know how many of them are descended from Turks, meaning are related to Turks. And the most white-looking people of Iran are mostly Turks, but there are also Russian, Georgian, and Armenian people too living in this region. And we all know that Turks are not an indigenous people to this region. They came from southern Russia and the Central Asia in recent centuries, and they cannot be an indigenous people to this region. The ancient inhabitants of the ancient peoples of the Middle East were all different types of black people, different groups of black people. Assyrians were a black people, Persians were a black people, Elamites were a black people, and Arabs, yes, were a black people. That's why you see Assyrians have depicted themselves with curly hair, curly beard, and dreadlocks. That's why you see Persians have depicted themselves with curly hair and curly beard. And even there are many wall paintings found in Susa in which Persians have depicted themselves with black skin, have painted themselves with black skin. So therefore Persians were black people, not a so-called Indo-European. And I believe that Persians, Assyrians, Arabs, and all of the ancient inhabitants of the Middle East were an Ethiopian type of people, the so-called Semitics, an Ethiopian type of people. People like the Somalis, like Ethiopians, like Eritreans, like Djiboutis, like dark-skinned Yemenis. You know, they weren't a white people. Why? Because the temperature here in this city goes up to 50 degrees Celsius in summers with a high intensity and a UV index of 12. White people cannot endure this heat. They cannot tolerate this heat, so they cannot be indigenous to this region. Because we semi-white looking people cannot stand this heat. We cannot go outside too much in summers. But how can white people be indigenous to this region? And I don't say this because I'm racist. As you can see, I'm not a black person, and I look mostly like whites than blacks. I just want to tell the truth that the ancient inhabitants of these regions, from Babylonians, Assyrians, Elamite, Persians, Jews, were all black.
Now, an open question in the history of human migration is the identity of the earliest Eurasian population that have left contemporary descendants. The Arabian Peninsula was the initial site of the out of Africa migrations that occurred between 125,000 and 60,000 years ago. Now, leading to the hypothesis that the first Eurasian populations were established on the peninsula and that contemporary indigenous Arabs are direct descendants of these African people. Now, come with me as we take a look at the history of these people. The indigenous Arab genomes defined a cluster distant from other ancestral groups, and these genomes showed clear hallmarks of an ancient out of Africa bottleneck. Similar to other Middle Eastern populations, the indigenous Arabs had high levels of Neanderthal admixture compared to Africans, but had lower levels than Europeans and Asians. Now, these levels of admixture are consistent with an early divergence of Arab ancestors after the out of Africa bottleneck, but before the majority Neanderthal admixture events in Europe and other regions of Eurasia. Now, humans can trace their ancestry back to Africa, where the ancestors anatomically modern humans first diverged from primates and then from archaic humans. Now, human beings leaving Africa through a number of coastal routes where estimates suggest that these out of Africa migrations reached the Arabian Peninsula and as early as 125,000 years ago and as late as 600,000 years ago. After entering the Arabian Peninsula, human ancestors entered South Asia and spread to Australia, Europe, and eventually the Americas. The individuals in these migrations were the most direct ancestors of ancient non-African people, and they established the contemporary non-African populations recognized today. Jewish blackness sometimes means that the Jews were quite literally seen as black, which is a matter of color, but often a more provocative sense is implied, namely that in the eyes of non-Jews who defined them in Western society, the Jews became the blacks, which refers to race. Now, for several decades now, the study of black Jews in different parts of the world has been one of the major academic preoccupations. So this is basically a brief history of the Jews. Thank you for watching, and see you in my next video. Don't forget to comment.